The great Republican overreach of 2011. Who is the most overreaching of all? Yes, Wisconsin's Republican Governor Scott Walker almost single-handedly galvanized the entire country's Democratic base with his union-stripping crusade. Yes, Ohio's Republican Governor John Kasich one-upped even Mr. Walker by not just union-stripping, but union-stripping cops and firefighters specifically, and then by screaming on camera about police officers he thinks are idiots. Yes, Florida's Republican Governor Rick Scott keeps coming up with big new categories of Florida residents he wants to forcibly drug test. Drug testing, a service that happens to be provided by the governor's for-profit healthcare company. But the dark horse in any tournament to determine the most overreaching recently elected Republican governor in 2011 has to be Michigan's Rick Snyder. Governor Snyder, not just union stripping, not just trying to tax old people and poor people in order to give that money away to corporations. Rick Snyder signed a new law that lets his administration eliminate your voting rights at the local level. If you elected a mayor, a town council, any local officials in your town, the state, under Governor Snyder, will now decide if that election counts. They will decide if your town is allowed to keep your local election results or if they will overrule them and impose their own. It's being called financial martial law, these new powers that Rick Snyder just took for himself. Republicans passed the bill in March. Snyder signed it, and they just used it. They just imposed it for the first time. Guess where they're using it? Guess what they're using it to do? Guess. About that, you have to go here, to Michigan's Great Southwest, to the little twin cities on the shore of Lake Michigan. Last night, we talked about how one of these twin cities, St. Joseph, population 8,500, is nearly 90% white, has a per capita income of about $33,000. The other twin city, right across there, is Benton Harbor. Benton Harbor, population 10,000 plus. It is nearly 90% black. Benton Harbor has a per capita income of about $10,000, a third of what its twin city enjoys. Michigan's new Republican governor is a man named Rick Snyder. Governor Snyder has spent his first few months in office engaged in an aggressive campaign to strip Michiganders' union rights and to pass big new taxes on the poor and the elderly, using that revenue not to plug the state's budget deficit, but rather to give it away to corporations and to the already well-off. That platform has not been kind to Governor Snyder's popularity. But the one thing in Mr. Snyder's approach to governing that brought out the biggest protests in the Capitol, reportedly the biggest protest that Lansing, Michigan had ever seen. The catalyst for those huge crowds, those thousands of people, was in part a Rick Snyder law that takes away people's right to choose their local elected officials. A law that allows the state to declare your town a failure and to appoint an emergency financial person to be the new boss over the elected officials in your town. Someone who can order them to do things, who can undo what they have done as elected officials, who can fire them if he or she so decides. The state is not only coming in and saying, we don't care who you elected to represent you, we're firing them and taking over ourselves. The state is also claiming the power to just abolish your town. When was your town founded? Who were your town founding fathers or founding mothers? The state says we can dissolve your town now. We could wipe you off the map, give your land and your assets to the next town over if we want to, just roll up the whole deal and deed it over. Your town doesn't get a say in the matter. The first town to feel the tender ministrations of Governor Snyder's new law is Little Benton Harbor, one of the poorest towns in the state. On Friday, Benton Harbor's new state-appointed emergency overseer, Joe Harris, issued an executive order that restricted the mayor and the city commissioners to 3 duties. They can call a meeting, they can approve the meeting minutes, and they can adjourn the meeting. 3 things that elected officials of Benton Harbor are now allowed to do. That's it. This is really, really, really big intrusive government. This is sit down, shut up, your elections don't matter, we're in charge now. Authoritarian, giant government. And this ought to be the debate about what's on offer right now from American politics. This ought to be the debate about the 2 major parties right now, about whether we are okay as Americans with really big take over your town intrusive government, because that is what is on offer. I realize that the debate in D.C. is going to be about the Gang of 6, whether the Democrats are really going to let them change the Social Security retirement age, and that is fine. That is a real debate. It is important, but on real policy, real implications, real governing, not what people are saying they're going to do, but what they're actually doing, there is a stark choice to notice and debate out in the states. Florida, Texas, Arkansas, North and South Carolina now moving to require you to take a drug test, forced drug testing, as part of getting the unemployment benefits that you paid for when you were working. Arizona and Georgia passing laws that force anyone to prove they're in the country legally whenever a police officer wants to know. Papers, please. States across the country saying they will decide whether or not you can get an abortion and what your doctor is allowed to say to you about abortions in your doctor's appointment. The government will give you a script. The government will decide what your doctor says and what you are allowed to do. The government decides now, not you. State governments in Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, and Tennessee are acting to strip people of their union rights. You might have heard something about that. This is big, intrusive, activist government put into motion and into law at state houses around the country. Our Republican-controlled legislatures right now are filled with politicians who campaigned on small government and respecting the will of the voter trademark. And then they got into office and they really started doing quite radically the opposite. In Montana this month, Democratic Governor Brian Schweitzer, remember, he heated up his veto brand for a long string of bills that had been passed by the new Republican legislature in Montana. One of those bills, a bill to recriminalize medical marijuana. The Republicans' bill would overturn a law passed by the people of Montana in a referendum in 2004. Another one of those Republican-passed laws would have allowed the return of cyanide leaching in mines. Voters had outlawed that through referendum not once but twice in Montana. But the Republican bill would have overturned what the voters said they wanted. In Wisconsin, the Republican legislature overturned a Milwaukee referendum that mandated that companies give their workers sick leave. When that got up for the vote in Milwaukee, it got 69% of the vote. The people of Milwaukee want that. Governor Scott Walker says he will overrule those voters. The state legislature will step in. The state will step in. They will overrule those voters. Governor Walker says he will sign that bill. In Missouri last week, the Republican legislature there voted to overturn a citizen referendum that bans puppy mills. Rules about cage size, rules on sick animals, feeding, stuff like that. The people of Missouri voted against conditions like these for dogs. And the Republican legislature has now voted to overturn the vote of the people of Missouri. So much for all that will of the people stuff. Joining us now is Mayor Bernero ran in the 2010 gubernatorial race against the current governor of Michigan, Republican Rick Snyder. Mr. Mayor, thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Rachel, thank you for being such a patriot and a believer in democracy, for bringing this to the fore. Our founding fathers are rolling over in their graves at what's happening in Michigan. It is dire and it is sad, a sad day for democracy. It's really everything you said. It is taxation without representation. You know, it is the corporatization. We're seeing the corporatization of our democratic process. Today in Michigan, they trained something, the government is training 200 EFM, emergency financial managers. This is an industry now that the administration is going to be in. They have lowered the bar for taking over cities. It used to be EFMs were a very rarely used thing. Their powers were circumscribed. They were to go in and deal with the finances and work with the powers that be. Now they are in charge. Now they can fire elected officials. It is unprecedented in Michigan and I think in America, and it's dangerous.
I saw a Bloomberg News report about those trainings for the emergency financial managers, and one of the things that leapt out for me was, as you're saying, this is something that used to exist in a very small scale, reserved for real emergencies. They're talking about broadly expanding this and using this with something more than a dozen different triggers that can start a process like this where a town just gets taken over. And what Bloomberg pointed out was that it is investment banks and law firms and other people who have been involved in sort of corporate takeovers, doing this stuff in the private sector, who are now hoping to get in on this as a hot industry in the public sector. Do you see this as a privatization of democracy, of public processes?
Exactly, and this is why I say corporatization, profitization of local government. It is unprecedented, it's dangerous, it's incredible that it's come to this. You know, I'm a believer in democracy. This is autocracy. I think the governor must have asked himself, WWPD, what would Putin do? You know, this is the kind of thing in Russia, in Soviet Soviet Russia, what is becoming increasingly Soviet Russia again, they appoint the governors and the mayors. And that's basically what we're headed for. And they've lowered the bar. So it's very easy to fall into this. And not only that, Rachel, but, you know, they've cut revenue sharing for cities. So they're really cutting support for cities, in essence, you know, shooting you in the foot and then blaming you for limping. We're struggling to survive in this economy, and the state is doing nothing to help us. In fact, they're hindering us, and the only thing they're doing then is threatening us with this privatization, this corporatization, with a czar who is going to be appointed, who is not going to work with the local authorities. You know, never mind what happened to local control. I thought the Republican Party was the party of less control, less government, and local control. They have thrown local control out the window. This is a return to King George. You know, this is what the American Revolution was about.
Is this what the 2010 campaign was for there? When you were running against Rick Snyder and Michigan voters are given a choice about who they want for governor, is this what the campaign was about? Is this what Republicans, including Rick Snyder, said they were going to do to Michigan if they got into power?
Well, absolutely not. And I mean, we tried to get out of him what he would do. There wasn't a lot. There was one debate, exactly one. He said very little. I think a lot of the Republican candidates for governor said very little. They had a script. They stuck to it. And certainly there was nothing like this talked about. In fact, there was talk about helping cities. You know, I'm a mayor. I was running for governor. I know that our cities need to be the hub of the wheel instead of the hole in the donut. There was a lot of talk about how to help cities. And I haven't seen any of it. We're not getting any help. What we're doing is getting the rug pulled out from underneath us, and then these incredible, unprecedented powers, this power grab coming from the executive office is unprecedented, and they've lowered the bar so much. You know, the governor's office is right across the street from me. I'm afraid if I sneeze loud enough, that could be grounds for an EFM. They have really made it easy to take over a city, and you'd think that normally the state government wouldn't want to do that. Normally the state government would be assisting and trying to help you on your own, maybe move you back. If, like I say, if there was an EFM, he would be in and out quickly. He would make adjustments. He would work with the locals, try to build an empowered local control. They're doing just the opposite. They're coming in and wiping out the local boards and the local institutions. It's incredible. And so what are you going to be left with? At the end of the day, what are these EFMs going to have accomplished? They're going to wipe out a lot of city services. Where is the economy going to be of the region? How are we going to grow as a state if we're not enabling local control, if we're not building up our cities and helping our cities to become strong?
Virg Bernero, Democratic Mayor of Lansing, Michigan, thank you for your time tonight, sir.
Thank you, Rachel.
And do not sneeze. Appreciate your time.